Well, here we are, sitting at the end of an era. In less than 72 hours, Breach will be out. City Walls will be out. Intentions will be out. This chapter of 21 Pilots, the story, will be winding to a close. And what a saga it has been. I myself have only been following along since 2017, and I've only been talking about it for the past year and a half, but these past 8 years have been quite something. But before that final $1 million music video drops and the story wraps up for good, I wanted to lay out one final theory of my own. A theory that I've been working on and building towards ever since Paladin Strait came out. Various videos that I've put out over the past year have hinted at aspects of this theory, but in this video I hope to tie them all together into one cohesive narrative, which helps to fill in many of the missing gaps, explain much that has been confusing, and help to predict the ending, although I'm sure I'll be somewhat off the mark in that regard. But first, let us take a look back at some of the questions which are still unanswered, some parts of the story that don't quite make sense under the current official narrative. First of all, and this one has been bugging me for quite some time now, why does Clancy lie to us in the I Am Clancy video? Or another way of looking at it is, if he is telling us the truth there in that video, why does he lie to us in his journal? The lie in question is as follows. In the I Am Clancy video, he explains that it was Nico who tracked him down and brought him back to the city of Dema. But in his journal, he very clearly states that it was Keons who found him and took him back. Yes, it is a small detail, a small inconsistency, but it is such a blatant one that it forced me to take a look back at any other small inconsistencies that we've seen cropping up throughout the entire story. Sure, you could hand-wave them all away under the label of lazy storytelling, but I'm not inclined to believe that a decade-long story is being told lazily. And another likely inconsistency, although it certainly is less blatant, comes when he's telling us about the events of Heavy Dirty Soul. In the I'm Clancy video, he explains that he tricked Nico into taking him outside the walls of the city. And as I discussed in another video, this explanation has never sat right with me for two reasons. First, there is no explanation offered as to how Clancy tricked Nico into taking him outside the city walls. It certainly doesn't make that much sense given what we know about Blurryface and his strong desire to keep everyone inside the city, and not let them know anything about what is beyond those walls. However, I could be much more easily convinced that Keons was tricked or perhaps even convinced by Clancy to drive him through Trench, given what we know about that bishop's character. Secondly, and this supports that idea, Keons is the bishop associated with the song Heavy Dirty Soul, and he is also Clancy's own bishop, ruler of the village in which Clancy lives. In fact, until the I'm Clancy video came out, the mainstream theory was that that was Keons we see driving the car in the Heavy Dirty Soul music video, since that is his song. And then we have those official reports from Dema, which again seem to indicate that it wasn't Nico who drove Clancy outside the city. And when we look at Clancy's own journal, another inconsistency crops up, because we see no mention here of any kind of escape by car. At least not until we get to the very end of the journal, and that's just the script for the I Am Clancy video. In fact, the events of Clancy's first escape, as outlined in this journal, are quite different to anything we see in any of the music videos. He writes, "They're asleep. This night took forever to arrive, and now we're almost ready. We've studied the Watchers and know that there's no chance we can slip through unnoticed. So instead of trying to hide ourselves, we'll make sure that all of us are noticed. It's been 1 year since the last convocation, and tomorrow's annual assemblage of the Glorified will be the biggest spectacle this concrete coffin of a city has seen all year. If we time it right, we'll divert the attention of the Watchers and finally take the step through. We've had no contact, but we're hoping that the other side will be able to find a way in. We're not sure of the breach location, but we are willing to risk being smeared in order to find it. We know that we must go lower and wait for the torches. They've never seen anything quite like this, and by morning everything will be different. I'm terrified and excited, all at the same time. They don't control us. Clancy." Now, perhaps this description could somewhat line up with what we see in the Nico and the Niners music video, but even if that were the case, that doesn't fully eliminate the inconsistency here, because what we see in that video is supposed to be Clancy's second escape from Dema, not his first. Another question that arises, and this isn't necessarily an inconsistency so much as another element of the story that doesn't quite make sense, is what occurs during the music video for Jumpsuit. In that video, we see two versions of Clancy. One wakes up in the middle of Trench, having made it outside the walls of Dema. He sees the banditos and the torchbearer, is tracked down by Nico, or a bishop on a white horse at least, is smeared and brought back to the city. But another version of Clancy appears at the beginning, at the end, and lurks throughout. This version is also smeared, but his head is shaven. He also appears to be operating from a different point in time to the main Clancy, if you will, speaking to him, as it were, from the morning after the events of Heavy Dirty Soul. At the end of the video, he takes a jacket out of the trunk of the car, a jacket which is very similar to what the main Clancy was just wearing, and putting it on, heads down the road, presumably to go experience exactly what main Clancy just experienced. And then there is one final question which I will use as the jumping off point for this whole discussion. Who or what awoke Clancy to the falsities of Dema? The very first entry in his journal begins as follows. The perplexities of the Dema horizon didn't occur to me until my 9th year. It was then that I began to contemplate the existential and decide what type of impression I wanted my life to make. Naturally, to fuel my hope, I looked out upon the distance of the land that had cultivated me, only this time with a new awareness of the obstruction that my youthful ignorance had allowed me to overlook. Was it there the whole time? How had I not seen something so obvious? Some recent event, perhaps the recent appearance of someone, had jolted him awake to the reality of the city. And I think that event was the appearance of his former self. Essentially, what we're dealing with here are two Clancys, interchangeable in the story that we've been given so far, interchangeable in such a way as to confuse the sacred municipality of Dema and hide the dual nature of their existence from them. Think about it. All the inconsistencies and the issues with the story that I outlined so far deal with two conflicting narratives, 2 points of view of roughly the same events. And it all begins to make a lot more sense when we understand that there are two Clancys. The two figures we saw in Jumpsuit, one by the car, one who is smeared. The two figures we see in Paladin Strait, one on the cliffs and one in the tower. That line from Taxicab, I am half a soul divided. And then the song 2, somewhat lost but not forgotten. The way in which Tyler constantly holds up 2 fingers when a verse with the number 2 in it is sung. At first people thought this was simply pointing to the fact that there would be 2 albums to end the story, but I think it goes deeper than that, especially since he just did it again for Drum Show. The journal, which itself seems to have 2 different voices speaking throughout it, in a way which is very similar to something like the journal we see in the film The Prestige. But of course, it is not as simple as just saying, well, there are 2 Clancys, 2 iterations of the cycle coming into contact with one another, and to leave it at that. If true, this has massive ramifications for the story as a whole. But I also think that for even more than just the questions I outlined earlier, this explanation, this theory, makes so much of the story fit into place. And so I would like to spend the remainder of this video unpacking this theory and explaining what the story looks like if this idea is true. So how does this even work? How do we have 2 versions of the same person coexisting in the story? Here's what I think is going on, and while it may sound a bit far-fetched at first, I beg you to bear with me, because I think there is a good deal that actually supports this idea, as crazy as it may seem. We know that this is a story of cycles. That has been made clear to us time and again. And in another video, I laid out the idea that we are currently in the 9th cycle, the 9th attempt to break free. The 8 bishops of Dema, all besides Nico, are just the result of a failed cycle, a failed attempt at escape. So what if through some glitch, or perhaps through some power which we are not quite fully aware of yet, the 8th attempt and the 9th attempt crossed paths? The 2 looping timelines at play here converged. And they did so because the earlier of the 2, who for the sake of clarity we'll call Clancy 1, was able to slow down his inevitable cycle, in order that the second, the latter of the 2, who we'll call Clancy 2, was able to overtake his former self. And this moment, this convergence, took place in the album Trench. That's why, for instance, we see so many songs with melodies playing both backwards and forwards at the same time. And that's why we see this dynamic of these 2 played out in the very first music video for that album, Jumpsuit. I think also we see this duality in the song Bandito. In that song, we get these lines. I could take the high road, but I know I'm going low. I'm a bandito. So what if that song is trying to tell us something along these lines? Clancy 1 is a bandito, maybe even a high-ranking member of that group. And Clancy 2 is the Clancy as we've come to know him, wearing that mask and outfit and so on. And so we can trace the story of Clancy 1 as something along these lines. One night, during the annual assembly of the Glorious Gone, as the bishops are distracted, some of the banditos, led by the Torchbearer, make their way into the city of Dema using a secret tunnel to rescue some of the citizens. This is very similar to what we see in the music video for Nico and the Niners, and this is what is described in that entry from the journal entitled Heavy that I referenced earlier. Clancy is one of the few who makes it out, and it is he in particular that they were looking for, because they know who he is. That is, they know that he is someone who has been going through this cycle over and over again, and each time becoming a bishop at the end of it. At least, the Torchbearer knows that. Perhaps the others don't. And so, with Clancy rescued, the Torchbearer lays out a plan. A way in which the cycle can be broken. One way only, through which Nico can be defeated. And the Torchbearer's plan is referenced in 3 Moon 18. Clancy writes, "The small eerie island has made me a weapon. We both believe that we can use it to change the momentum of this war. Now, we must return to the mainland where they should be there to receive us. We will destroy and rebuild. Though it's been years since he last spoke with them, I hope they have not lost faith in the Torchbearer's plan." But how could any of this have been planned? But there is one catch. This plan will likely cost this Clancy, Clancy 1, his life. And that's why we see the following line in the song, "A car, a torch, a death." He laid it out what he had planned, and then I said, "I'll take the grave, please just send them all my way." There is a weapon that they need, a power which only the bishops of Dema can wield, and without which they have no hope of winning the war. The power of psychokinesis. Clancy 1 knows that Nico will be on his way already, trying to hunt him down and bring him back to the city. So, as night falls, the banditos lower their watch, allowing Nico to sneak in and smear Clancy and bring him back. But this drag path is different. Back in the city, Clancy 1 pretends to succumb to the will of Nico. He willingly becomes a bishop of Dema, completing his own particular cycle and becoming the bishop Keons. So, like all the bishops, he is given a village to rule over, and he does so for a time, quickly earning the reputation as one of Dema's kindest bishops. And it is in this village that Clancy 2 arrives. Now, let us pause this narrative thread for a moment and go back in time to that moment referenced a second ago in the Bandito camp as they were laying out their plans. As was revealed to us on May 23rd, 2024, right before the release of the album Clancy, the Torchbearer has his own power. Something which hasn't been quite shown to us or demonstrated fully, but which we know deals in the manipulation of time and space. And perhaps he has the ability to let others do so. Therefore, before Clancy 1 allowed himself to be recaptured that night in the camp, the Torchbearer sent him out on 2 missions. The first was to go forward in time, to join up with Clancy 2's timeline, the first convergence. Now, this is something that's not clearly shown to us in the official narrative, so it's something we can only guess at, but I think it makes a lot of sense to imagine something like this happening. My guess is that he visited Clancy 2 as he sat complacently in Dema, and awoke him to the reality of that dystopia. The second mission that he was sent on that night is something I'll return to in a moment, but in the meantime, let us return to the main narrative thread. So Clancy 1 is now Keons, and Clancy 2 has just awoken to the realities of Dema, as he outlines in his first letter. The visit has stirred up in him an impulse to see beyond the walls, and so he begins to pester his bishop for the opportunity to see what's out there, if only for a moment, to see the beyond. Keons agrees, and the first stage of the plan is set into motion. He drives him out, further than they would have ever been authorized to go, to a quiet stretch of land where a projection of the Torchbearer is waiting for them. The surveillance droids cannot see yellow, so they don't notice the Torchbearer, but they do see Clancy 2. The Torchbearer's projection destroys the car, and Clancy wanders off into the wilderness of Trench, lost. Before the banditos can catch up to him, however, Nico orders Keons to track him down and bring him back to the city, and so Keons overtakes Clancy 2 before he and the Torchbearer can actually establish contact. Keons brings him back to the city, and Nico is enraged by the successful attempt at escape and the notoriety which Clancy is now gaining among the citizens of Dema. So he orders Keons to make him create a propaganda show to perform for the citizens, and Nico tells Keons, but not Clancy 2, that at the end of the show, Clancy will have to sacrifice himself as a willing vessel to show the citizens that even he will gladly participate in vialism. Thus, the television performance is born, and Keons, realizing that he's running out of time, begins to set the second stage of the plan in motion. One day, while Clancy is busy writing the show under the watchful eye of several of the other bishops, Keons travels out to the island of Voldsoy, and there he meets up with Ned, as we see referenced in the note next to Ned's fireplace. There, Keons gives Ned the tools of psychokinesis and teaches him all he knows about the power. There was, however, one aspect of the power that only Nico knew about, as we'll see later. With the television show over, Keons suggests that the show which he and Clancy created should not stop there, but that a traveling tour should be arranged. Nico sees no reason not to, and so Clancy too sets out on the first stop of the tour, an underwater submarine performance, a rare opportunity for the most loyal and devoted subjects to venture outside the walls. While they are vulnerable at sea, Keons awakens the corpse of a long-forgotten sea monster and sets it on the submarine. Clancy makes his way out of the sinking vessel, and Keons keeps the corpse alive long enough to guide him to the shores of Voldsoy, although Clancy too himself was not entirely aware that this was happening. Just as Clancy had almost made it to shore, the other bishops become aware of Keons' treachery and slay him. Keons holds the connection as long as he can to finish guiding Clancy to his destination, and that's why we see him offer no resistance to his attackers. And Keons knew that his death was the most likely outcome to this plan, so as a message to the Torchbearer, he named the performance and the album born out of it Scaled and Icy. Clancy is dead. Clancy too is on Voldsoy. He is given the power by Ned, as we see in the outside. He meets up with some other banditos the following morning, and they head to the main bandito camp, where the Torchbearer fills him in on all the other gaps of the plan, and they prepare to attack at dawn. Now, remember I mentioned earlier that the Torchbearer sent Clancy 1 on 2 missions that night in their camp? The second mission is seen here in the Battle of Paladin Strait, and even shown in the music video itself. There's a rather subtle and small but extremely important detail in this music video that I myself overlooked for months. While at the Bandito camp, as they're laying out their plans to attack the city, Clancy doesn't have any black paint on his neck or hands. But then, as they march upon the city that same day, only a few hours later, and he confronts Nico in the tower, he clearly does have black paint on his neck and hands again, even before Nico smears him right at the end of Paladin Strait. So this second appearance, the one who confronts Nico in the tower, is Clancy 2. The first, who we see in the camp laying out the plans, is Clancy 1, who had been sent there to converge with this timeline by the Torchbearer many years before. And he was sent there not just to help establish the plans and get everything firmly laid out, but also to aid in the Battle of Paladin Strait itself. As Clancy 2 climbs the tower and makes his final stand against the bishops and Nico, Clancy 1 is also making his way into Dema, and we see a shot of this in the Level of Concern ARG. That figure in the tunnel is dressed as Clancy was in the camp, but does not have the mask that Clancy 2 was wearing when he attacks the city and climbs the tower. So here's my prediction for the ending. Clancy 2 enters the tower. He uses the power of psychokinesis against the 7 bishops who are standing there, all of whom are past versions of himself. But what he doesn't know about this power, and what only Nico ever knew, is that if this power is used by the same person against himself, it is rendered useless. It essentially short-circuits. The bishop's connection with the undead army below is broken, rendering Dema defenseless. But then, the 8th bishop appears, Nico flying through the door right for Clancy's neck. And Clancy's weapon, his power, has also been rendered useless. He is smeared and cast into the void of the glorious gone, surrounded by the souls of the seized, all of whom had given their lives willingly or unwillingly, in order that he might have this chance, this one final shot at saving Dema. And there, lost in that void, the fake Torchbearer once again appears to Clancy, offering him a dark jacket. Clancy looks at him, but does not take the jacket. and with one final push, one final effort, forces his eyes open and comes face to face with Nico for the last stand. "Hello, Blurryface," he says. "Let's finish this." And it is at that moment that Clancy 1 enters the tower. Nico is caught completely off guard and defeated. The remaining guards, the living guards of Dema, are quickly subdued now that the army of the undead has been destroyed. The battle won, Clancy 1 returns to camp and to his own timeline, readying himself to be smeared by Nico and dragged back to Dema. These words echo in his mind as he stares into the campfire and waits for his never-ending time loop to begin once more. "So you put me back in my place, so I might start another day, and once again I will be in a march to the sea." Clancy becomes a bishop, a new kind of bishop, a new kind of ruler, a Nova bishop. He restores order to Dema, renounces vialism, and gives the people hope once more. And then, as the morning light fully dawns, he finds himself fading away into something else entirely, and slowly, cautiously, opens his eyes. An alarm clock is ringing beside his bed. He goes to shut it off. It reads 8 a.m., no longer 4:05. The ceiling fan is moving slowly above him, and he goes to switch on the overhead light. It beams on, all 4 light bulbs illuminating his room, and he stares at it in some confusion. He could have sworn the 4th was shattered. He is more rested than he is used to, and for some strange reason he is convinced that the nightmare which had been plaguing his dreams for the past 9 weeks will no longer haunt him. It was all a dream. Yes, it was all a dream. The strange cave-dwelling trolls, the winged creatures, the haunted vultures, the undead graves. A world filled with the projections of his own subconscious, and another world he had descended into, had almost found himself lost in. A world within a world, a dream within a dream. He had battled his own mind for control, and he had won.